Good morning guys, I hope you are well. This is the fourth video in the Transport in Cells kind of mini series. Thank you very much for everyone that's subscribed, all family and friends. I'm currently up to 51 subscribers. Genuinely, it might not seem like a lot, but having started this and having 18 subscribers yesterday, going up to 51 is a very big deal for me. So thank you very much. Keep following. It's Ahmad Science UK on Instagram and Ahmad Science UK, the Facebook page. Thank you very much. Keep up the support and share it with anyone that you think will find it useful. Now, in terms of today, what we're going to look at is active transport. So, why do cells need to carry out active transport? If they've got diffusion, if osmosis exists, why does active transport need to exist? And there's a very, very key reason why. And what we're going to look at today is describe what is meant by the term active transport, give examples from animal and plant cells regarding active transport, and then finally compare the process of diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. Yeah? So we're going to kind of summarize it all today in this video. Now, imagine a situation where you are trying to get onto a very, very busy train. It's 5 o'clock, everyone's leaving the office, you're trying to get home from school, and you've, for some reason, got a buggy with you. If the train's already quite packed, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get the pram on. So ultimately what you have to do is say, excuse me, and then you have to kind of back your way onto the tram and make sure that you protect the pram. If you've not experienced that before, don't worry, there's still time. Now, actually, in that situation, what you need to do is overcome the number of people in the train carriage in order to get yourself on and the pram on at the same time. Yeah? And that's kind of what active transport is. And I know what you're thinking, what are you talking about? Bear with me. Keep that image in your head as we talk through today's lesson, and hopefully what you'll see is actually it's very similar in a lot of ways, and what you're trying to do is you're using energy to overcome the natural flow of particles which is out of the cell if there's already a lot of particles inside the cell. Now, in this situation here, if I gave you this and you know about diffusion, what's going to happen? Well, clearly the number of cells inside are going to leave the cell in order to flow down the concentration gradient. But in active transport, what actually happens is as the particles move around randomly through Brownian motion, as one of them hits the cell membrane, proteins on the surface of the cell membrane will change their shape and pull that particle into the cell. Hashtag crazy. So why? It's because active transport is a process of moving molecules from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. Now, actually, that's the opposite of diffusion. It's moving from low concentration to an area of high concentration. Yeah? And this clearly is against the concentration gradient. So it's going in the opposite direction to which the concentration gradient would normally facilitate diffusion to occur. Now, why would this happen? Where would this happen? It happens in two places that you guys need to know about. It happens in plant root hair cells, and what happens is plants need ions to grow. So in terms of the ions, if you choose this one here, for example, there's already a large amount of mineral ions inside the root hair cell. And what the plant needs to do is pull more mineral ions into the root hair cell so they can be transported up to where they are needed in the leaves. However, in order to do that, the particle needs to flow against the concentration gradient. And again, like I said, this requires energy. So think about you getting onto a packed train with a pram. You need to provide energy to go onto the train carriage. However, if the train's already packed and you're trying to leave, it's quite easy. Someone will probably push you out. But in active transport, you are going in the opposite direction. So what do you need if you're going in the opposite direction? Well, you need energy. And where does energy in cells come from? Well, it comes from the process of respiration, which takes place predominantly in the mitochondria. So the two things that you need in order for active transport to take place are glucose and oxygen. Yeah? So that's an example from plants. So let's have a look at an example from animals. Well, and you might be surprised by this because it's one of the things that you don't really think about, but sugar molecules actually get absorbed from your small intestine into your blood via active transport. and sugar molecules are used for respiration. So if you take the image here, similar image to the one we used in diffusion, this is in a regular situation, the orange particles, because they're in a high concentration in the blood, they should move from the blood to the small intestine. That's the small intestine, that represents the blood vessel. However, actually what happens is, if you look at that orange particle there, the one that's just appeared on your screen, sorry, I'll stop. What happens is, as that particle randomly collides with the cell membrane, proteins on the surface of the small intestine as well as the blood vessel will change to facilitate the movement of that particle into the blood vessel, just like that. Okay? If you haven't had a chance to write this down because I'm moving quickly, that's alright. Pause the video, make your notes, and then move on from there. So, if you compared the processes side by side, diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, what would be the key differences? Firstly, diffusion and osmosis are passive processes. They happen naturally, they don't require energy, so therefore they don't require oxygen, glucose, or respiration to take place. However, active transport does, and therefore you'll find that cells that have to carry out lots of active transport will also have lots of mitochondria. What will they have? Lots of mitochondria. In terms of the movement of particles, diffusion, osmosis, both particles will move from high concentrations to low concentrations. Whereas in active transport, you are moving the opposite way. You are moving from a low concentration to a high concentration. Okay? Now, finally, diffusion and osmosis take place down the concentration gradient. So they go down the concentration gradient, again, from high concentrations to low concentrations. Whereas active transport, we say, moves against. So it moves against the concentration gradient. Okay? If I look at this cell here, now what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that the blue molecules are water molecules, and we're going to pretend that the purple molecules are some sort of mineral ion, and this cell, even though it doesn't look like it looks like an animal cell, we are going to pretend that that is a root hair cell, very badly drawn root hair cell. So what's going to happen? Well, the water molecules, if you look at the diagram, is in a very low concentration inside the cell, and we know that water moves into the cell via osmosis. However, if you compare the mineral ions are in a high concentration inside the cell and a low concentration outside. So they will move inside the cell via active transport. Which one of those two processes needs energy? It's going to be the active transport. Yeah? Active transport requires energy. So if I was to redraw this cell, well, obviously it's a plant cell, so I'd have to draw a cell wall, I'd have to draw a vacuole, I would have to make sure that I've got my mitochondria drawn in there, because that's what's going to allow large amounts of respiration to take place, and go from there. No chloroplast, so it's underground, doesn't need it. So what sort of exam questions could you be asked? Well, first one, epithelial cells in the small intestine absorb some types of molecules by active transport. Name one food molecule that is absorbed by the small intestine via active transport. Think back to the slide from earlier. The answer for this question is going to be glucose. Another question, slightly more difficult. Why is it necessary to absorb this food molecule by active transport? Again, it's worth 1 mark. However, you need to explain that there's a higher concentration of glucose in the blood compared to the small intestine. So, glucose, because glucose needs to move against the concentration gradient. And so the final question, explain why the rate of absorption of these sugar molecules can depend on the concentration of oxygen in the cells lining the small intestine. That question is worth 3 marks, okay? So we need to make 3 very specific points, 3 clear points that are going to allow us to get 4 marks. Now, let's have a look at this question and break it down just a little bit, because it's asking you to link your thinking. Explain why the rate of absorption of these sugar molecules can depend on the concentration of oxygen in the cells lining the small intestine. What does the concentration of oxygen have to do with active transport? Well, we know that oxygen is needed for aerobic respiration, yeah? And therefore, why do we need aerobic respiration to take place? Well, we need it for energy, so which is needed to provide energy for active transport, okay? And therefore, we need to make the link of explaining why the rate of absorption depends on the concentration of oxygen. The higher the concentration of oxygen, the more active transport can take place. Okay? Right, guys. I hope that makes sense, and I hope it wasn't too quick. But thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for taking time. I hope you find it useful. Again, as always, like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Facebook. And if you want to leave any comments, then you can leave them there. As always, take care. Look after yourselves. Bye.